those homeschool years were kind of a foundational moment where the people who were speaking these kind of words of inspiration and that I had maybe value as someone who could contribute to the world were my mom and dad. I think that was pretty foundational for me thinking that I could even endeavor to take on a career that I think a lot of people see as maybe a pipe dream. And I think that in reinforcement of the idea that you could do the thing for which you feel excited and called was probably a direct result of homeschooling.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Homeschool Talks. My name is Jeremiah Lorrig, the Deputy Director of HSLDA's Generation Joshua, and I'm super excited about our guest today, Reid, founder of Distant Moon. We're going to have a conversation about him, his life, his career, and how he went from being a homeschool student, homeschool grad, and now homeschool dad, working as a filmmaker. So, Ian, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Great to see you, Jeremiah.
It's good to have you. So can you tell us a little bit about your story? How did you start as a homeschool kid and move to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think like most people who have a career in video production or film production, I, like pretty much everyone else, started out by just finding a home video camera. In my case, it was a mini DV camcorder like this big, and has like a little pop out swivel screen, and you just start like pointing it at things and going, wow, you can like capture the world. And in the case of the little mini DV camcorder that I had at the time, captured the world very poorly in like 320p, which is like 320 pixels, I think up. In contrast, people are used to today watching things in 4K, which is like something like 20 times the resolution of what we would have been filming on a mini DV camera. And so, found an old camcorder that my parents had for like filming family events or, whatever, baptisms or, weddings or, childhood videos of the babies growing up, and realized that you could kind of put together little stories and capture the world as you saw it. Fast forward a couple of years, my friends and I started making really stupid home videos. Think of the whatever the thing that you as a kid liked watching, whether it was spy movies or, Steven Spielberg movies, Jurassic Park or Indiana Jones or whatever it is, right? Take those characters and kind of thematic ideas. And, as a 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, you're, playing around with your friends in the backyard, finding the mystical pizza tree instead of, whatever it is. So making stupid home videos, got to the point of fanaticism about making home videos that on, I think maybe my 12th birthday party, had several friends sleeping over. And instead of like playing games or, doing traditional party things, our kind of core little group of friends who all kind of caught this home video, like movie making bug, spent literally all afternoon through the night and into the next morning making kind of like a Jason Bourne ripoff, spy movie. And I don't even think I had seen the Bourne movies, but like we were aware of them. And so like we're making this like stupid little spy movie, dropping in, music that we stole from other films at the time from Apple Music. You download 99 cents a song and like we end up spending like $5 or $6 on songs.
Hey,
and,
that's big money for an 11-year-old.
I wonder if I actually asked permission from my parents to buy things on the Apple iTunes account. I don't actually know. I don't know how that worked because I didn't have a debit card or credit card. So it would have had to be their money. I was probably just using their money to buy music.
Now's your opportunity to apologize.
That's right. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. They're probably not watching this, but we'll send it to them as an apology letter. And so, kind of caught this bug, did a ton of stop motion Lego animation with a camcorder. In case people are aware of how stop motion works, it's actually usually shot with stills cameras. Well, we didn't have a stills camera, so we literally would press start stop as fast as we could with the camcorder, move the Lego guy, start stop, so, and it's not good stop motion because it's like, it's actually probably like 5 or 6 frames instead of like 1 frame. And so, it's kind of like very jerky, like Lego stop motion, but we love doing it. Fast forward, you get into kind of junior high, and by junior high, all my friends, not interested in filmmaking any longer. But at that point, I think I had become aware of, junior high, early high school. I'd become aware of the fact that people actually had it as a career, making movies, and that could be something where, instead of your parent going off and working as like a banker or, a construction foreman or a dentist or like whatever, that there were some people's parents, and therefore some people who actually went to film sets and worked with actors or, lit scenes and shot them with cameras, and that was actually a viable like way of making a living. I grew up in a homeschool family, like you mentioned, and my parents were really big into classical education and, great books programs and things like that. And by the time I got into late high school, that idea that, maybe what I really want to do with my life is make movies, started merging with a lot of the things that I was reading at the time, in great books programs, covering, writings from people like C.S. Lewis. And I actually took a great books course that I think was in my junior year of high school that focused specifically on the writings of the Inklings, which was the writing group that Tolkien and Lewis and a lot of Oxford professors met at a pub called Eagle and Child and just talked about ideas in their writings and shared excerpts of things that they were writing. And so that year in my junior year of high school, I was kind of like being inundated with these ideas from great thinkers who wrote some of the kind of seminal works of kind of the mid 1900s on Christian apologetics in a very like winsome way and in a way that kind of caught cultural attention. Lewis's Mere Christianity was based on a series of radio talks that he had given. And so Lewis was one of those Christian apologists who was not only famous kind of after dying and after his life, but was really well known and famous during his lifetime as well, known for his radio talks and a lot of the work that he had written, notably Chronicles of Narnia, as most people know him. But I got this idea that Christians could be involved in storytelling, and now fast forward 70 years to past when Lewis or Tolkien were writing. Maybe not 70, maybe 50 or 60. But fast forward, and now, not only is there the written word in which we can tell stories and not just radio through which we can tell stories, but, we're at like this kind of height in the early 2000s of Hollywood filmmaking. You think of a lot of the kind of big blockbusters, that are kind of that defining of the summer blockbuster were coming out kind of late 80s through the early 2000s. And all of this is kind of like merging in my head with the writings of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and Sayers and other Inklings about the role of Christians in vocation and in the lives that they're meant to lead. I think another thread at the time was this idea that homeschooling is an opportunity to help young people find what their calling in life was, and I think there were in some ways that idea maybe was pushed too far, but I think my parents kind of found this right balance of inspiring a young person with, what they might be able to do with their life, and merging their passions and maybe what God has called them to do with, making not just a career, but hopefully having some sort of impact for the kingdom of heaven. Those things all inspired me to basically think, maybe I can become a filmmaker, and maybe I can be not just, another filmmaker who's like pumping out Christian movies and kind of almost, Christian propaganda in a way, but maybe just telling beautiful stories that point to truth in the world. And that, instead of trying to like push a specific message or a specific almost kind of sermon, in the stories being told. Maybe just tell great stories and let the truth of the world that God created come through beautiful storytelling.
I love the idea of finding our inspiration for telling good stories in the world around us. God, I believe God put us here in this place with the beauty that is around us. And that speaks to us in powerful and profound ways that sometimes words cannot sum up, and no sermon can touch some of those profound points. You mentioned homeschooling as a key part of your story. How did homeschooling help set you up on this path where you are today?
Yeah, I think the main way that it set me on the path that I'm on is it gave me direct access to, on a daily basis, the people who most cared about me, being the ones who were instilling in me a vision for what my future could be. I think my specific story, I'm not going to universalize it and say that, everybody, has parents who spoke inspiration into their life. But I think my parents were very good at weaving in an idea that God made each individual, and therefore me, for a specific purpose, or maybe specific purposes. And I think, as I got into college, I went to a classical liberal arts college that emphasized the idea of vocation as well. And so, as we grow, ideas that are planted as seeds start to either wither away as we realize that we don't agree with those things, or they kind of grow roots and become maybe the foundation for a more deeper ideology or belief system as you start to realize the world in which you live and kind of gather the learning that you've been filled with over the course of your growing up. And so I think for me personally, those homeschool years were kind of a foundational moment where the people who were speaking these kind of words of inspiration and that I had maybe value as someone who could contribute to the world were my mom and dad. And I think that was pretty foundational for me thinking that I could even endeavor to take on a career that I think a lot of people see as maybe a pipe dream. I think a lot of people look at, the world of filmmaking or the world of directing or things like that as well. That's not something that people can just do. That's directors who can do that. But it's well, who are the directors? It's the people who, spent the years developing the craft and believing the insane idea that they could actually make movies, as a career. And I think maybe that's the thing that homeschooling gave me is this kind of reinforcement from my parents on a daily basis that, look, if you have the desire, if God has placed that desire in your heart, if you're passionate about doing it, and if you see him opening the doors to walk down that path, then that's probably what you're made to do. And I think that in reinforcement of the idea that that you could do the thing for which you feel excited and called was probably a direct result of homeschooling.
I love the process of discernment and how we all go through it. We all have to discern, where we're going to go and what's the right thing for us in our own lives. But also homeschool parents have to help be a part of that process for their students, their children. What advice would you give to a homeschool parent who's watching this right now and are realizing they may have a student who is interested in pursuing a career like this?
Man, I don't know that I can give advice because as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I am also a homeschool parent now. And I think that any parent knows that based on your own parenting experience, you feel to probably the least qualified to give anyone advice on parenting. I think maybe I can say what our thought process is right now as homeschool parents. And that is, we are trying to just constantly watch and listen to the unique strengths and nuances of each of our kids. We have 4 little boys. And what is shocking to me as a parent is, our oldest is 8, our youngest is almost 3. So they're 8, 6, 4, and 3. And from the moment that they're born, pretty much, and I think this probably resonates with most parents who hear this, like the moment or with the first week, 2 weeks of like that new life, they are like already like totally different from the previous sibling. And it is shocking how like someone who comes from the same set of parents and grows up in the same household and has like all the same environmental factors is just like a completely different human being, different interests, different inclinations, different strengths, different weaknesses, different everything. Same eye color. They all have brown eyes. So that's the similarity. But like it, so I think because of that, my wife Yetta and I are very right now focused on, praying that God will show us like what each boy needs to become the man that they're meant to be. And then like watching and listening and just like trying to like take in, like absorb, like, who are you as a human being? What are you here to do, and then try to, prepare them and encourage them and love them and make sure that they know that we're there for whatever step along their journey of life we possibly can be, but also not to say, hey, this is what you're meant to do, because at the end of the day, I don't even know all the things I'm meant to do. I have inclinations, but if there's one thing that we realize, I think, as we enter adulthood, it's everybody is still at their core, a lost little lamb, or like a child who doesn't really quite know what's fully best for them and is in need of, both community and fellowship and, wise counsel of others. And everyone's on this journey of discovering, like, what are the things I'm ultimately supposed to do with my life, and what am I here on earth for? Like, that's the question, right? Whether you're a Christian or an atheist or anything in between, the question is like, what am I here for? And I don't think you fully learn that until eternity. And I think even if you have a good idea of, maybe a lot of the reasons you're here, I think maybe there are probably a host of reasons you might be here that you weren't aware of as well.
I love the idea of, seeking that purpose and direction. And one of the things that I'm reflecting on is, in your story, you decided the name of your production company when you were 13, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, somewhere in that range, somewhere between probably 13 and 14. I don't know, somewhere in there.
And I grew up out west. I grew up in Colorado, and the image of distant moon, it evokes like a coyote and a mesa, and like kind of something like that. What were you thinking when you were envisioning this name, this company, this brand back when you were young?
Well, can I ask you a follow-up question on that?
Of course.
You envision a coyote on a mesa, kind of like howling out the moon, or like looking at the moon, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does that make you feel? Like, what is the like emotional sensation you get when you think about that picture?
That's a fascinating question. I think for me, it's a bit of that mystery and adventure that comes with the unknown. The moon is out when it's dark and things are uncertain. But a coyote is a predator. They're not just passively sitting, waiting to be eaten. They're out and about. So it seems like to me, oh wow, you're like psychoanalyzing me. But it's kind of that idea of mystery, but with, facing it maybe with boldness. And there is the moon, and the moon itself is bright. So here,
yeah.
how's that for seat of my pants?
I love it, and that I think there were 2 objectives. And I don't actually know I think my answer to the question, what was the purpose behind that name, has grown deeper. I mean, we talked about the seed, there was a seed of an idea when I came up with that name at 13 or 14, but the meaning has become more full, I think, over the last, 20 years, because I'm 33. And when I was 13, the idea was, I don't want to make the name of my film company, at the time, video company, a standard Christian-y sounding name. I mean, I saw a lot of people, it was kind of like the beginning of like the Christian filmmaking movement. And I kind of reacted somewhat violently, emotionally, to a lot of Christian films that were being made at the time, because they were very preachy, very like almost sermons packed into like the shell of like something that pretended to be a film in a story. And so I didn't like that. But I also wanted to be reminded of the fact that as someone who is a believer and has a relationship with Christ, I am here for purposes other than just like having fun. And so I wanted a name that reminded me of, some element of like walking the Christian life, walking the Christian walk, but also to like anyone who didn't know like the secret meaning, that it just sounded kind of like an interesting, secular, kind of cool name. That kind of deepened over the years. And I started thinking about the kind of metaphor of the moon and like, what does the moon represent? I started really liking and latching on to the idea, like you said, of kind of the unknown and exploration. In my mind, it's interesting to me that you still get to the unknown and mystery and exploration with a coyote on the mesa kind of howling at the moon. In my mind, it's like you're in outer space and like you're on the far reaches of some like sci-fi galaxy, right? Whether you're in like Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever, and like you're heading to some like distant moon, some unknown, there's this like sense of like exploration in the unknown, that idea like go boldly where no one has gone before, I think is from Star Trek, right? Or shows you how little I know about Star Trek. That's probably not true. But that idea of like the unknown and exploration, and like we're going to uncover things that have not been uncovered. And I understand that there's nothing new under the sun. Whatever, we're retreading the story that have come before us. We're trying to encapsulate very finite understanding of human experience that any single human being can personally experience in the form of storytelling through film. But there's this idea of like exploring that which maybe isn't fully understood or fully known. And then fast forward even a few more years, this idea of, I don't know where this idea came from, but the idea hit me one day. Oh, the moon reflects the light of the sun onto the world when it's at its kind of darkest point, in the middle of the night. The main source of light on the dark side of the earth is the moon, but it's not producing its own light. It's reflecting the light of something greater. And when that hit me, I actually like in college, I was like, oh, distant moon is such a stupid name. Like I shouldn't use it. And then that thought hit me like, there's a celestial body above our planet who is totally passive, not creating its own light, reflecting the light of something greater. What better metaphor is there for what, as a storyteller, we're doing in terms of, we're reflecting the truth of a creator in a world in which we live, but didn't ourselves make, stories that we ourselves didn't like create ex nihilo, but everything that we are doing is a reflection of something greater than us. And I think, I say that as a believer, but I think even if you're not a believer, like you have to recognize that like pretty much anything that any storyteller creates isn't coming from you out of nothingness. It's the whole combination of every influence and thing that you've experienced in other human beings, the world that you live in, the environment that you came from. It's all these things like, filtering down together and being reflected out in this kind of unique kind of twist on the story. And so that idea of reflecting something that isn't of you, but comes from something greater beyond you, was a reminder to me that I personally am here on earth to reflect the light of Christ into the world.
I love that story. So I'm picturing you. You said I think you started making film at like 8. I'm picturing a little 8-year-old.
He was like, yeah, maybe like 9 or 10.
9 or 10. Little Ian. And you keep using the term filmmaker, and it's distinctive from video production. So what is a filmmaker? What does that mean to you in some sort of distinctive way?
Yeah. Well, so I think if you go back into the history of storytelling through the motion picture, or the moving image, all movies that told stories when I was growing up and when you were growing up, they were all shot on 35 millimeter celluloid film. And the term filmmaking or filmmaker became synonymous with this genre of long form storytelling, in which you're telling the stories of characters who come into conflict and have to then, over the course of the film, resolve their conflict and hopefully end up in a slightly better place, or maybe way better place than they started at the beginning of the film. If you think of the term film, it's always referring to that kind of more planned out, nuanced, character-based storytelling. And the idea of video in video production or videographers honestly didn't even kind of show up on the scene until, probably the late 90s, early 2000s. And it didn't really become a thing where it was like a career until 2007, 2006, early into the 2010s, when you start getting the internet as something that everybody is going on. And, YouTube, I think, starts in like 2006, 2007. Facebook kind of goes public, not just at universities, I think around 2007, really mass adoption in like 2008 through 2010. Social media becomes a thing, and suddenly everybody's sharing a bunch of content, whether it's video or photo or written stuff or memes. Memes and GIFs become super big in the 2010s. And suddenly there's this like whole new category of people who are making videos. And this is like the category of, this is what's going on like at the beginning of me starting to like enter the world of like filmmaking. Right. I think what you started to see is there's a lot of young filmmakers at the time started gathering on this platform called Vimeo, which is still around. And it's much less kind of an art hub or community now than it was when it first started. But that was kind of like the place where a lot of, young millennials who are entering this kind of world of filmmaking and want to be like, they all want to be Steven Spielberg and Christopher Nolan and David Fincher and, insert like famous director in the early, like in the kind of late, I don't even know what you call like before 2010, but like kind of the years just before 2010 to like 2015, right? And there's this like explosion of small form factor DSLRs that are suddenly with really big sensors, which creates a much more cinematic looking image for low price points. And suddenly everyone's creating video that looks pretty good. And suddenly you have this burgeoning industry of video makers instead of filmmakers. And so for for several years, there's this confusion of like, are they filmmakers? Are they video makers? Are they videographers? Are they filmographers? Like what is it? And I think they're kind of developed this maybe sometimes unspoken and also sometimes explicitly spoken agreement that filmmakers are the people who are either currently or working and kind of dedicating their lives to try to tell stories, whether in long form, feature films or in TV shows or in documentary series or, documentary feature films, but who are trying to create storytelling, whether scripted narrative or documentary, that takes audiences on a journey and therefore has, a whole host of large scale like production challenges and requirements and things. And so there's like a whole apparatus of crew and scripting and planning and pre-production and post-production that goes into filmmaking. And kind of as opposed to that, they're really kind of crystallized this idea of videography or video making, which is what you see, so many Instagram influencers, so many YouTubers, that's kind of the category of like video making. And then videography is kind of like a subset of that. Videography tends to be just capturing like live events or doing like wedding films or, filming things that are kind of happening in the moment and then doing like recap videos of those things. So there's kind of like a few different categories, but I'd say that's kind of the finest point, at least right now, that you could put on the distinction between like filmmakers or people who are working to become filmmakers and like videographers or like content creators, which, is more like video focused. And it's ironic because at this point, everything actually is video. Like even like the big tentpole blockbusters are not actually like, most of them are not actually film anymore, which is why people make such a big deal about like, Christopher Nolan making, Oppenheimer on 70 millimeter film. And it's like 3 miles of, it's like a 3 mile long film reel that's like, wider than I can reach my arms. And like people make a big deal about filmmakers who are actually using film because it's not synonymous anymore. Most filmmakers now shoot on really high resolution digital cameras, which is, if you're getting really nitty gritty about it, just high resolution video that happens to have a lot of specific things necessary for film production, including high dynamic range, larger sensors, the ability to connect to classic cinema lenses, which are, a different mount type than people usually have for DSLRs. So it's become even more muddy because technically really everyone's shooting video, but the distinction now is not really as much about, is it on celluloid or video? And it's now what genre of content are you creating?
And are you telling a creative story or a story creatively? So you're working, or you just, I guess, are wrapping up a project that you've been pulling together a creative way to tell some stories. What's been your creative process? What's been your creative process for this project?
So right now we are in the middle of post-production on and this is funny because we just talked about the distinction between filmmaking and video production. And I'd say this project we're about to talk about kind of blurs the lines between the two. And I would say, some of the time, what Distant Moon produces is filmmaking. And some of the time what we produce is maybe more, content creation or video production. And, sometimes the lines are blurred. But we are in the middle of post-production, which means the editorial, visual effects, sound design, music, gathering historical assets and editing those into the timelines. So we're in the post-production process of what is the second kind of project that we've worked on with Mike Ferris, who happens to be one of the founders of HSLDA, and I think as a result, Generation Joshua. And it's kind of the sibling, maybe the thematic sibling to a project that we did, I think about 10 years ago. That project was called Constitutional Literacy. And in that, Mike Ferris goes through the history and theory of the U.S. Constitution and its application to our lives today. As a filmmaker and creative, I now look back at that and I cringe because of, how far the technology has come and how far I have come with my team in terms of like how to produce content. But this is kind of this new project, American Civics, which we're in the middle of post-production on, is basically taking the idea of, okay, so we talked about the Constitution, he talked about the Constitution in this previous project. Now looking a little bit more holistically at what is it to be an American citizen. And, if Mike was to teach his kids, his family, what American citizenship entails and what it means to be a person who lives in the United States and the duties and responsibilities, but also privileges of American citizenship, kind of what sort of civics program would he want, and candidly, would I want our kids to learn? And so what we did is over the last couple of years, we'd been talking about undertaking this project. We actually began production we began the pre-production last fall and production back in January of this year. And we've shot the whole series, but it basically does a deep dive into the foundations of how our government works and what the founders intended in terms of how the government ought to work, the checks and balances, how the executive branch is different from the legislative, how it's different from the judicial, and how citizens ought to interact with those branches and their representatives, and what we should as citizens be able to expect from our government. So that's kind of one section. The next section is a little bit more of a survey of the constitutional theory behind government in the United States and the role of the citizen. And then the third is more of a focus on the foundational beliefs. Mike is a Christian, and so he unpacks from a Christian perspective in that kind of last third, how might Christians kind of look at government and the role of the citizen from a Christian perspective, and how Christians can become active in training either their children in the next generation, or active in a civic sense. But from that view of how do you love your neighbor and how do you love your nation and try to serve the nation and the neighbor as a believer. So those are kind of the three categories that the course really kind of dives in and hones in on. And like I said, we are in the middle of post-production, in the middle of the review process, and Mike reviewing episodes as they hit final cut stage, and we're planning on rolling out the kind of beta launch of this for this upcoming school year.
Awesome. And if anybody is interested in this, you can get a link to the pre-order form in the show notes. This sounds like a great project. I know Mike Ferris, he has such a heart for Americans to understand their government, and to hear him talk about this, I think is going to be really exciting. What are some of the other projects that you've really enjoyed working on over the years? I'm guessing that a lot of people may have, a lot of our viewers or listeners may have seen some of your work and not even known that you were behind it.
Yeah, we've, and I think this gets back to, some of the earlier conversation about, my hope of discovering what my children are, what they feel called to do, and where they feel, a lot of people have debated about the idea of passion. Do you tell kids do you encourage them to follow their passions and chase their dreams, or do you try to encourage them to be realistic? For me, I'm really glad that my parents encouraged me to follow my passions. And so that's why I'm, so, interested in finding out, what are my children passionate about and what are they called to do, and what maybe are the vocations that they're meant to carry out on earth. And we all have multiple vocations. One is to be, maybe for me, a filmmaker, and another is to be a father, and one is to be a husband. One is to be a member of my church. So a lot of different vocations to which a human can be called simultaneously. But I think that one of the most exciting things for me in my career has been to discover the specifics of the vocation to which God has called me. And for me, that has been oftentimes being surprised by a door I didn't even know was there, that then was like cracked open and given the opportunity to go, like, you can walk through this and you don't know where it's going to lead, or you can keep like going really hard in the direction that you think you're supposed to go. And sometimes I make, the probably wrong decision to like go, no, I'm not, like, that's not the door I want. I want to like go the direction I want to go. And then you like have struggle and like you suffer and, and then there's the times when you make the, what I would say is maybe the right call and be like, oh, I think this is a door that God is like maybe opening. And I didn't plan to walk through this door. And I didn't even really want to like pursue that type of film production or whatever it is. But what the heck? It seems like this is an open door. It seems like I'm supposed to walk through it. And so let's see where it leads us. One of those projects was about 4 years ago now. We had gotten a call out of the blue from a college called Hillsdale College. And they had ironically seen a short documentary that we shot on their campus without their permission about one of their students for a different conservative nonprofit. We didn't ask the institution for permission because, it was like me and another friend of mine and actually two other friends of mine. And then we like snuck on campus for like 3 days, I think. And we like shot in different classrooms. And then we shot like drone shots of the campus. And like we were filming with a current senior at the school at the time. And it, just totally guerrilla, unapproved, wouldn't have been approved if we had asked for permission. I know this because I've since become friends with people at the college, and they've told me, yeah, you would have never gotten approval. But fast forward like 2 years, and someone in their marketing department saw that video and was like, hey, did you guys know that they shot this here? And they're like, no, we didn't. And then they like talked to a different department. Did they like get permission in? And they're like, no. And they're like, well, but it's kind of really like, we like this. Like, should we ask them to do like a project for us? And so like out of the blue, we get a call from the marketing department, and they asked us to produce a little kind of low budget ad for Facebook for their college. That went pretty well. And then they were like, hey, do you want to do more stuff with us? And we're like, sure. And, let's walk through the door and see where it leads, and the next project that they asked us to pitch on, and pitching is, same thing, same concept across, different industries. You'll often be requested to put in a proposal, which is, your creative direction, budget, scope, what the outcomes of the project are going to be, a little bit about you and your company and the team you're bringing on board. So they asked us to put a proposal or a pitch deck together for if we were given the permission to revamp their online courses. And they had been doing online courses for maybe 6 or 7 years at that point. They were pretty kind of almost like, a professor in front of like a blackboard, not necessarily very styled, kind of very straightforward, like teaching to the camera. And they were like, if you were going to do online learning, how would you approach this? And we got that question, and my first response internally was like, well, I don't want to do online learning. Like that's not what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be a filmmaker, and I'm supposed to, make movies, not online courses. But I thought about it. I felt like God was saying, see, like they're not asking you to make the online courses they've already made. They're asking you, what would you make if you were given the opportunity to make whatever you wanted in the online learning space? And at that time, there was this new company called Masterclass. At the time, it was new. And they were kind of the first people. They'd released like 2 courses at the time, I think, that were like online learning and teaching content, but like beautiful and like cinematic, and felt like you were kind of watching a movie or like a beautifully made documentary. And I was like, well, I guess if I was going to do online learning, that's like what I would want to do. But then I would want to push it like further in post-production, because at the time Masterclass wasn't doing very much editing. It was just beautifully shot, but not very much editorial. And I was like, well, what if we use this as an opportunity to really push forward our filmmaking and try to practice the art of filmmaking almost as if we're making feature-length documentaries. So shoot it as beautifully and as cinematically as we can. Make it a very personal one-on-one experience between the professor and the audience, even though, hopefully thousands of people will be watching it and not just like one person. And then try to fill it up with as much historic footage and motion graphics and text treatments and overlays as possible, so that it feels like you're going on this journey with the professor through whatever the material being taught is. And so that's what we proposed to them. And they were like, you guys are the only ones who took that approach to it. We like that approach. You've got the job. And so that began what became a now multi-year incredible relationship working with Hillsdale to produce their free online courses. And it's been a really satisfying relationship, because it's like every passing year that you have a working relationship with a client like that, the trust grows deeper, and the sense of experimentation and kind of trying to push the boundaries in terms of how do you draw audiences in with online learning, and how do you make that experience something that feels like they're going on a journey through the material instead of just being like taught to or spoken to. That's been a really enjoyable process. And once we started releasing those, we were shocked by the audience size that Hillsdale was able to start bringing in. They're incredibly strategic, incredible at executing, reaching the society with these important, timeless ideas and principles. And we've now produced, I think, something like 20 or 21 free online courses with Hillsdale College over the last like 4.5 or 5 years. And I think they have something like 1.5 million or 2 million signed up registered members of their platform taking the courses. And it's just been, it's so surprising because it wasn't at all on my radar. It wasn't something I even really wanted to do at the time when it first like landed on our plate. But I'm really glad that we walked through that door and kind of explored what would it look like.
What could it be? It sounds like you took that filmmaker approach to the project and said, okay, how can I make this come alive? How can this be more of a story and less of a lecture, even though it is a lecture, right? Like you make it fill out in a way that captures the imagination and the mind and into something that's memorable.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I think that is our hope, and that's still our hope as we do them. How do you draw audience? And in fact, we actually create all the sets. So all the sets that the lecturers teach on are actually built for that course. They're all on a sound stage. They're not real environments. And the reason why we do that, and the reason why Hillsdale invests the extra money into having us do that, is because from early on, we just what you said, we wanted to create a world for audiences to step into where everything about the environment that the lecture is taking place in is reinforcing the foundational emotions and ideas and principles behind that subject matter, so that audiences feel like not just the truth of the material is being absorbed, but that the beauty of the world in which that material takes place and exists can also be absorbed. I think there's often an idea that's lost in our society that, if you're teaching truth, that can't also be beautiful, or that it has to be like tedious or hard to get through. But I think, if you ascribe to the idea that all truth comes from a being from whom also all beauty comes from, and that like the world in which we exist, which is a beautiful thing and sometimes a messy and horrific thing, but that it also is like beautiful and jaw-dropping and mind-numbingly incredible in its creativity and in like nuance down to layers that we can't as normal human beings even experience. When you're thinking about what percentage of the universe and reality we actually in our finite experiences are able to even deal with or come in contact with. There's so much creativity and so much beauty. Wouldn't beauty and creativity also ideally go with truth? And so our whole idea was, can we create something that's not just truthful and education filled and rich for the mind, but something that's also beautiful and satisfying to kind of the heart, or like the part of the human that wants beauty and to experience story and kind of those more aesthetic aspects of reality.
Wow. So as we're coming to the end of this conversation, I'm imagining people listening to you and saying, I am, I'm picturing a high schooler who's like, oh, I want to do this. I want to tell stories. What encouragement would you give to them?
I mean, so the first thing I would say is there is no path to become a filmmaker, which is both encouraging and very discouraging. And I say there's no path to becoming a filmmaker because filmmakers literally have every single background. You have fashion designers who became filmmakers. You have lawyers who became filmmakers. You have, English majors, and you have doctors, and you have business people, and you have, hat designers, and you have like every possible background that you can imagine has and will become filmmakers if that's what they choose to pursue. And I guess the advice I would say is not go to film school or not like do XYZ thing, but at the core foundational level, I would say if you want to do filmmaking, one, learn what good storytelling is and understand what has come before you. There's that idea it's become popularized with videos on YouTube that kind of touch on the same thing. There's this video that went viral maybe like 7 years ago called Everything's a Remix, but it encapsulates that same idea that has been talked about by philosophers since, the dawn of philosophy. And it's that idea that there is nothing that is wholly original that you can create. And there's always been something along the same theme or thread or storyline that has come before you. And so your job as a storyteller, whether in film or any other medium, is to know what's come before you and then to join in that great conversation that has gone on for millennia, and give your own kind of twist on it and like do something interesting with it. Like the idea that any of us will create something original is too hard of a pressure for a finite human being. But the idea that like, oh, I know what Dante wrote, or I know what Shakespeare wrote, or like, I love what Thomas Hobbes wrote in Leviathan, or like, whether you're talking about theater or literature or philosophy or history or theology, like fill your mind with those things. And by the way, plug for homeschooling. I think if you homeschool, you have the opportunity to dive into these things at the level to which you personally feel driven, which might not be a great thing if you're not driven. But if you are driven to become someone who understands how to tell stories, you don't have to wait for the syllabus of the school that you're in. I mean, you technically don't have to wait for the syllabus of the school you're in if you're in private or public school either. But I would say, like, regardless of whether you're a homeschooler, private schooler, or public schooler, dive into history, dive into philosophy, dive into theology, history, anthropology, and study what's come before you, because only then will you understand how you, as a human being, can participate in the great tradition of storytelling and understanding how story reveals to us truths about the world in which we live. And then you'll have something worth saying to the world that you live in. Whether or not you're remembered for it, having something worth saying and that can impact the lives of those who are watching or consuming your stories for the better, I think is the thing that we can at best hope for.
I love that. I love the idea of telling more stories, because I firmly believe that civilizations store our knowledge in textbooks and in databases and, things like that. But we store our wisdom in stories. And that's what we need more of, I think, in this time. It is so wonderful to have you here. I love hearing you tell your story. I love hearing you talk about the stories that you've continued to tell. And I'm super excited about your upcoming project you're releasing with Mike Ferris. And if any of you are interested in checking out the work of Distant Moon and what Ian is doing, feel free to check out the show notes. We'll have some links there where you can find more information. Thank you, Ian. It's been wonderful to have you today. And thank you to all our listeners. Thank you for listening to HSLDA's Homeschool Talks. If you're not a member of HSLDA, we would love to have you join us. Please go to homeschooltalks.com/join if you're interested in supporting homeschool families. And also, you can go to homeschooltalks.com/donate to continue to support the cause of homeschooling all around the country and the world. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with your friends. And if you would like to listen to more episodes, go to homeschooltalks.com, and to be sure to like or follow this channel on the platform of your choice. Thanks for joining us today, Ian, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening.
Today's episode is made possible by HSLDA's Generation Joshua program. Do you have a student who wants to make a difference in our nation? Generation Joshua empowers teens to make the most of their citizenship through local clubs, immersive simulations, online courses, and real-life campaign experiences. For more information, visit generationjoshua.org. That's generationjoshua.org. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.